I'm Dr. Sarah Katz, a trauma surgeon who spent 15 years pulling people back from death. I never believed in near-death experiences. I dismissed every patient story as hypoxia, as the brain's last desperate fiction. I was certain that when you died, you simply ceased to exist. Then I died on an operating table in Jerusalem. And what Jesus showed me about October 24th will shatter everything you think you know about the future. September 7th started like any other night shift at Hadassah Medical Center in Jerusalem. 2 critical cases already behind me. A family of 4 from a car accident. A construction worker who'd fallen 3 stories onto rebar. I was running on coffee and adrenaline, the way you do in trauma surgery. Then at 9:30 p.m. the sirens started. Not ambulance sirens, air raid sirens. If you've never lived in Israel, you can't understand what that sound does to you. It's not just a warning. It's a visceral reminder that you exist in a place where violence can erupt at any moment, where the boundaries between ordinary life and chaos are paper thin. I'd heard those sirens dozens of times over the years, and every single time my stomach dropped. But this time was different. The hospital's emergency protocol activated immediately. We began preparing for mass casualties, converting operating rooms into triage zones, calling in off-duty staff, stockpiling blood products. The atmosphere shifted from controlled urgency to barely restrained panic. You could feel it in the air, thick and electric. Then the explosion started. Close, too close. I remember the walls shaking. I remember the lights flickering. I remember thinking, in that moment of crystal clarity that comes when your brain knows something terrible is about to happen, that I might not make it through the night. The first wave of casualties arrived within minutes. Shrapnel wounds, blast injuries, burns. The smell of smoke and blood filled the trauma bay. We moved like a coordinated machine, each of us slipping into our roles with practiced precision. This was what we trained for. This was what we did. I was elbow deep in a young woman's chest cavity, clamping a torn artery, when I heard it. A whistling, high-pitched, getting louder. My surgical resident's eyes met mine across the table. We both knew. Incoming. The explosion lifted me off my feet and slammed me into concrete. My head cracked against the wall. Something sharp pierced my abdomen. Warm blood soaked through my scrubs. Sparks from severed electrical lines. Dust falling like snow. The surgical resident pinned under collapsed ceiling. The young woman on the table, her eyes still open, watching me slide down the wall to the floor. I couldn't move, couldn't call for help, couldn't get enough air. Metal protruded from my stomach just below my ribcage. Even then, my clinical mind assessed the damage. Penetrating trauma to upper abdomen. Likely liver laceration. Possible inferior vena cava damage. Significant blood loss. 5 minutes until hypovolemic shock. Another 5 until irreversible organ damage. But the emergency systems were down. No one was coming. I was alone, watching my own death approach like a train I couldn't stop. The fear wasn't about pain. It wasn't even about ceasing to exist. It was the terror of being utterly alone, facing the vast unknown with nothing but my own fragile consciousness. My heartbeat slowed. Cold crept up from my extremities. My vision narrowed to a tunnel. And then it stopped. My heart just stopped. I know exactly what that feels like now because I was fully conscious when it happened. One moment I could feel the rhythm, the familiar thud, 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 thud that had been the soundtrack of my entire life. The next moment, silence. Stillness. A void where the pulse should be. The world didn't fade to black like I'd always imagined. I saw the destroyed operating room with impossible detail. Every piece of debris. Every drop of blood. Every particle of dust suspended in the emergency lighting. And then I saw myself. My body crumpled against the wall. Eyes half closed. Blood pooling beneath me. I was looking at myself from above. From a perspective that should have been impossible. I could see the piece of shrapnel embedded in my stomach. Could see the irregular rhythm of my chest as my dying brain sent confused signals to my respiratory system. Could see the exact moment when my pupils dilated and became fixed. I was dead, but I was still here, still aware, still thinking. The rational part of my mind, the part that had spent 15 years explaining away mysteries with science, tried to process what was happening. Hypoxia, I thought. This is just my brain creating a coherent narrative as it shuts down. This isn't real. But it felt more real than reality. I became aware of something pulling me, not physically. There was no body to pull. But my consciousness, my awareness, was being drawn away from the broken operating room, away from my corpse, into something else. The darkness came first. Not the darkness of a room with the lights off, but absolute, complete absence. It should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, like standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable. And then, the light. It started as a pinpoint in the distance, but it grew with impossible speed until it surrounded me completely. But this wasn't ordinary light. It wasn't photons bouncing off surfaces. It was alive. It had presence. It had intelligence. It had love. The feeling that washed over me in that moment is impossible to describe with human language. Imagine being seen, truly seen, for the first time in your entire life. Imagine every wall you've ever built, every mask you've ever worn, every secret you've ever kept, becoming completely transparent. And instead of judgment, instead of rejection, you experienced total acceptance. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever known. Then, within that living light, he appeared. I knew who he was immediately, even though I'd spent my entire life as a secular Jew, who'd never given Jesus Christ a second thought. There was no mistaking his presence. It wasn't about religious iconography or cultural conditioning. It was a recognition that went deeper than consciousness, a knowing that existed in the very fabric of my being. He was both impossibly far and intimately close, both terrifying in his power and gentle in his approach. His eyes held galaxies, and also the most specific personal knowledge of who I was. When he spoke, it wasn't with sound. His voice was truth itself, resonating through every part of my awareness. Sarah, you weren't brought here by accident. The way he said my name shattered something inside me. Not in a destructive way, but like breaking open a seed so it can grow. He knew me. Not the version of me I presented to the world. Not the competent surgeon or the rational scientist. He knew the Sarah who was terrified of being alone, who worked 80-hour weeks because she couldn't face the emptiness of her apartment, who measured her worth by how many lives she saved, because she didn't believe she had intrinsic value. He knew the parts of me I'd never shown anyone, and he loved them anyway. I wanted to speak, to ask the 1,000 questions racing through my consciousness, but I couldn't form words. I could only exist in his presence, held by that impossible gaze. Sarah, you've spent your whole life trying to save others, but you've never let anyone save you. The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. He was right. I'd built my entire identity around being the one who fixed things, who controlled outcomes, who stood between patients and death. I'd never allowed myself to be vulnerable, to need help, to admit that I was just as broken and mortal as everyone I treated. Tears would have come if I'd had eyes to cry with. Instead, there was just the raw emotion, unfiltered and overwhelming. He reached toward me and I saw his hands, saw the scars, understood, in a flash of revelation that contained more knowledge than a lifetime of study, what those scars meant. He hadn't just talked about love. He'd embodied it, had allowed himself to be broken so that brokenness itself could be redeemed. I'm gonna show you something, Sarah. Something about who you really are. The scene around us shifted. We were no longer in the light. We were standing in a hospital room, but not one I recognized. A woman lay in a bed, and I knew instinctively that she was dying. Cancer, advanced stage, weeks left at most. But there was something else in the room, a presence I'd never noticed before, never believed in. A darkness that wasn't just absence of light, but active malevolence, hovering near the woman, whispering lies into her fading consciousness. You're worthless. You're alone. Everything you've suffered means nothing. Death is the end, and it's coming for you. I wanted to scream, to tell the woman it wasn't true, but I had no voice. Then Jesus spoke, and his voice drove the darkness back like dawn scattering shadows. This is what you've never seen, Sarah. This is the battle that's always been happening, invisible to eyes that only believe in what they can measure. Every patient you've treated, every life you've touched, has existed in the middle of this war." He turned to me, and his expression held both infinite compassion and unbearable grief. "You've been fighting on the right side, without even knowing there was a battle. But you've been fighting blind, using tools that can only heal bodies while souls are being destroyed around you." The weight of that truth was crushing. All those years, all those patients, all those moments when I'd saved their physical lives, but never even considered that there might be something more at stake. How many had I sent back into the world with functioning hearts but dying spirits? The scene shifted again. This time we were standing on a hillside overlooking Jerusalem. The city spread out before us, ancient and modern colliding in that impossible way it always does. But I could see it differently now. Could see the spiritual reality underlying the physical. There were lights, bright and pure, scattered throughout the city, and there were shadows, deep and consuming, spreading like an infection. "Do you see it?" Jesus asked. I nodded, though I had no head to nod with. "This is why you're here, Sarah. Not just in this moment, but why you were born. Why you were placed in Jerusalem. Why you became a surgeon. Everything in your life has been leading to this." He gestured toward the city, and suddenly I could see beyond the present moment. I saw future events unfolding like a film played at incredible speed. I saw dates, specific and certain. I saw October 24th circled in red in my consciousness, though I didn't understand why that date mattered. I saw conflict escalating beyond anything the region had experienced in modern times. I saw nations making choices that would cascade into consequences they couldn't imagine. I saw the chess pieces moving into position for something that would shake the entire world. But I also saw hope, saw people waking up to the reality I was witnessing, saw lights pushing back against the darkness, saw transformation happening on a scale that seemed impossible. "Time is shorter than people think," Jesus said, and his voice carried a weight of urgency I hadn't heard before. "They're living as if they have decades, but the window is closing. The choices being made right now will determine everything." He turned to face me fully, and the intensity of his gaze was almost unbearable. "I need to show you something else, Sarah. Something about October 24th that the world needs to know." But before he could continue, something happened. A sound, distant but insistent, broke through the vision. A rhythmic beeping, voices shouting in Hebrew, hands on my chest, pressing down in the distinct rhythm of CPR. "No," I wanted to say. "Not yet. I need to see the rest. I need to understand." Jesus' expression shifted to something I could only describe as bittersweet. "The choice is yours, Sarah. You can stay here with me, where there's no more pain, no more fear, no more striving. Or you can go back to the broken body, back to the suffering, back to the world that's racing toward events it doesn't understand." The pull toward staying was overwhelming. Why would anyone choose to return to pain when peace was right here? Why would anyone choose the uncertainty of life when eternal clarity was available? But then he spoke again, and his words changed everything. "If you go back, you'll carry this message. You'll tell them what you've seen. You'll warn them about what's coming. It won't be easy, Sarah. They'll call you crazy. They'll dismiss you as just another NDE story. Your colleagues will question your competence. Your family will worry about your sanity." He paused, and in that pause I felt the full weight of what he was offering. But lives will be changed. People who are walking in darkness will see light. Souls that were destined for destruction will find hope. And when October 24th comes, some will be ready because you were faithful to speak what you've seen. The beeping was getting louder, the voices more urgent. I could feel the pull of my body, like a tether drawing me back toward the physical world. "Time is shorter than they think," Jesus repeated. "Will you go back and tell them?" I looked at him, at the scars on his hands, at the love in his eyes that held no manipulation, no coercion, only an invitation to choose something harder because it mattered more. "Yes," I whispered with whatever part of consciousness could form intention. "Yes, I'll go." The last thing I saw before the light collapsed was his smile, filled with both sorrow for what I was returning to and joy for what that return would mean. Then came the pain. If dying had been a peaceful release, coming back was violent agony. My consciousness slammed back into my body like a car crash, and suddenly, every nerve ending was screaming. The shrapnel in my abdomen, the crushed vertebrae in my back, the fractured skull. Everything I hadn't felt when I'd left my body came flooding back in a tsunami of sensation. I gasped, and my lungs filled with air that felt like broken glass. Someone was shouting in Hebrew, someone else in English. Clear. The word registered half a second before electricity jolted through my chest, making my back arch off the gurney. My eyes opened, though I wasn't sure I'd consciously chosen to open them. Fluorescent lights, too bright, faces hovering over me, masked and urgent. An oxygen mask being placed over my face, hands starting IVs, hooking up monitors, assessing damage. You're in Hadassah Medical Center. A voice said in accented English. You were injured in the attack. You've been in cardiac arrest. We got you back. You're going to surgery now. The ceiling tiles passed above me as they wheeled me down the corridor. I wanted to speak, to tell them what I'd seen, to warn them about October 24th, but I couldn't form words. My throat was raw from the breathing tube they must have already placed and removed. But my mind was racing. The vision was still vivid, still more real than the hospital walls around me. Jesus' words echoed in my consciousness. What he'd shown me about that specific date. The urgency in his voice when he said time was shorter than people thought. What I saw about October 24th defied everything I understood about prophecy, about the future, about the intersection of the physical and spiritual worlds. As they prepped me for emergency surgery, as the anesthesiologist began the count backward from 10, my last conscious thought before the medication took hold wasn't about my own survival. It was about what came next in the vision, the part Jesus had been about to show me when they pulled me back, the part about October 24th that I still needed to understand, because the vision didn't end there. What came next changed my understanding of everything. As I stood in his presence, time seemed to stop. The overwhelming light that had engulfed me, the peace that had washed away every trace of fear. It all suddenly shifted. In a blink, everything changed. Jesus looked at me with eyes that held the weight of eternity, and he spoke words that I will never forget. Sarah, he said, and my name on his lips felt like a melody I had been waiting my entire life to hear. What I'm about to show you isn't just for you. It's for all who have ears to hear. The celestial realm around us began to transform. The golden light dimmed slightly, and suddenly, I saw Earth below us, suspended like a fragile blue jewel in the vastness of space. But it wasn't the Earth I had left moments ago. It was different, urgent. And then I saw the date, burning in my vision like fire written across the sky. October 24th. This date, Jesus said, his voice carrying a weight that made my soul tremble, holds significance that the world doesn't yet understand. This isn't something prophets have proclaimed from pulpits or scholars have debated in seminaries. This is what I'm revealing to you now, in this moment, so you can carry it back. I watched, breathless, as the vision expanded. I saw Jerusalem, the city where I had spent years saving lives, now glowing with an otherworldly radiance. Above it, celestial signs appeared, stars aligning in patterns I had never witnessed, the moon taking on a crimson hue, and what looked like waves of light cascading from the heavens. It wasn't destruction I was seeing, it was preparation. Divine timing clicking into place like the final piece of a cosmic puzzle. October 24th represents a moment, Jesus continued, and I felt his words resonating through every fiber of my being. A moment when heaven's attention turns fully toward earth. A moment when those who have been watching, waiting, will see the signs. Israel, my chosen land, will be at the center of what unfolds. I need you to understand something. This isn't the kind of prophecy that's been recycled through religious circles for centuries. This wasn't in any scripture I had studied or any sermon I had heard during my sporadic visits to synagogue. This was fresh revelation, given directly to me in that moment, and the weight of it was almost unbearable. The vision shifted again, and I saw people around the world, millions of them, looking up at the same sky I was witnessing. Some were in awe, others were in fear, But all of them knew that something monumental was happening. The signs weren't subtle. They were impossible to ignore. Celestial movements, atmospheric phenomena, events that science couldn't explain away with comfortable theories. Think about how many times in your life you've looked at the sky and seen something that made you pause. A double rainbow, a meteor shower, an eclipse that painted the moon blood red. Now multiply that sense of wonder by 1,000. That's what I was witnessing. Millions of people simultaneously experiencing something that would shatter the boundary between ordinary and divine. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper in that vast space. "Why October 24? What does it mean?" Jesus turned to me, and his expression held both sorrow and hope. "It means time is shorter than people realize. It means the things I spoke of 2,000 years ago are not fairy tales or metaphors. They are reality, and they are approaching. October 24th is a marker, Sarah. A sign for those who are spiritually awake to recognize that the season has changed." He reached out, and suddenly we were standing above Jerusalem again. But now I could see it from a prophetic lens. The political tensions I had witnessed daily in the hospital, treating victims of violence and hatred, suddenly made sense in a larger context. Israel wasn't just a modern nation-state fighting for survival. It was the prophetic timepiece of God's plan, and the hands on that clock were moving faster than anyone realized. You know how a watch becomes invisible on your wrist until you suddenly need to check the time? Jerusalem had become that for the spiritual world, always present, always ticking. But most people had stopped paying attention, until now. Then something shifted that changed everything I was seeing. "This isn't about creating panic," Jesus said, and I felt his compassion flowing through every word. "This is about awakening, about preparation, about people understanding that the spiritual realm is more real than the physical one they touch and see. October 24th will be a day when heaven breaks through in ways that demand attention." I saw more. I saw prayer meetings erupting across continents. I saw people who had lived their entire lives in spiritual apathy suddenly falling to their knees, recognizing the reality of God. I saw others hardening their hearts, explaining away what they witnessed with increasingly desperate rationalizations. The division was stark, and it broke my heart. Then, in a single breath, everything shifted. "You need to tell them," Jesus said, and suddenly the weight of responsibility crushed down on me. "You need to go back and tell them that October 24 isn't about fear. It's about readiness. It's about relationship. It's about making sure that when heaven's attention turns to earth, they're not found spiritually asleep." Tears streamed down my face, though I had no physical body in that moment. "But who will believe me?" I asked. "I'm a trauma surgeon. I save bodies, not souls. Why would anyone listen?" His smile was gentle, full of a love I didn't deserve. "Because you died to bring them this truth. Because your testimony will carry weight precisely. Because you're not a preacher or a prophet. You're someone who lived in skepticism and science, and you encountered reality that transcends both." He reached out his hand to me. "That's why they'll listen." The vision began to fade, and I felt myself being pulled away from that celestial realm. Panic gripped me. I wasn't ready to leave. I wanted to stay in his presence forever, to bask in that peace, to never return to the harsh realities of Earth. "I don't want to go back," I pleaded. "Please, let me stay here." Jesus shook his head, and though his expression was kind, his words were firm. "Your time there isn't finished. You have a message to deliver, a purpose to fulfill. The life you had before this moment is over, Sarah. The life waiting for you now is one of divine calling. Will you accept it?" What choice did I have? In that moment, I understood that returning to my body, to my life, to the operating rooms and the trauma and the endless cycle of death I had fought against for years, it all had new meaning now. I wasn't just a surgeon anymore. I was a messenger. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll go back. I'll tell them." The light around me intensified one final time, and then everything went dark. I woke up gasping, my chest heaving as if I had been drowning, and suddenly broke the surface. Machines beeped frantically around me. Voices shouted in Hebrew and English. Hands pressed on my shoulders, trying to steady me. I was back in the hospital, back in my body, back in the world I had left behind. Sarah, can you hear me? It was Dr. Mizrahi, one of my colleagues. His face a mixture of shock and relief. You were gone. Your heart stopped for over 8 minutes. We thought we lost you. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. Finally, I managed to croak out words. I saw him. I saw Jesus. He showed me October 24th. The room fell silent. The medical team exchanged glances, the kind of looks reserved for patients experiencing post-traumatic delirium. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had been told. And no amount of scientific skepticism could take that away from me. In the days that followed, as I recovered physically, I wrestled with what I had experienced. My colleagues treated me with a mixture of concern and distance, as if my near-death experience had somehow made me unstable, unreliable. Some suggested it was brain hypoxia, a hallucination born of oxygen deprivation. Others simply avoided the topic altogether. But I knew the truth, and the truth had fundamentally altered everything about who I was. What I discovered in those moments after returning would reveal the real reason I was sent back. In the weeks of recovery that followed, I wrestled with an impossible question. Have you ever tried to describe a color to someone who's never seen it? That's what it felt like trying to explain what I'd witnessed to people who lived entirely in the physical world. I had seen beyond the veil. I had stood in the presence of divine reality, and I had been given a mission. So let me speak directly to you, whoever you are, watching this right now. This message finding you isn't an accident. You were meant to hear this. Maybe you felt that gnawing emptiness inside, that sense that there has to be more to existence than the mundane cycle of work, sleep, and distraction. Maybe you've wondered about death, about what comes after, about whether any of this matters. I'm here to tell you, it matters. All of it matters. And the time to recognize that is running out. October 24th isn't about running around in panic, stockpiling supplies, or abandoning your responsibilities. It's about spiritual preparation. It's about making sure your relationship with Jesus is real, not just religious tradition or childhood habit. It's about being awake when the signs appear, recognizing them for what they are, instead of being caught spiritually asleep. The fear you feel about death? I've been there. I've stood on the other side, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, your greatest fear or your deepest hope about what happens after this life, one of them is true. And you get to choose which one becomes your reality. You're not watching this by chance. You're part of something bigger than yourself, bigger than any of us. We're living in a time when heaven's attention is turning toward earth, when the prophetic clock is ticking louder than ever, when the signs are becoming impossible to ignore. October 24 isn't about fear. It's about preparation. It's about awakening. It's about making sure that when that day comes, when the celestial signs appear, and the world is forced to acknowledge that there's more to reality than what we can measure in laboratories, you're ready. I died to bring you this truth. I stood in the presence of the one who holds eternity in his hands, and he sent me back with a message, specifically for this moment, for you. So what will you do with it? Will you dismiss this as the ramblings of someone who experienced oxygen deprivation? Will you file it away as another internet curiosity and move on with your life? Or will you let this be the wake-up call you've been waiting for? The choice is yours. But don't let this message get buried. Share it, discuss it. Let it challenge you. Because October 24th is coming. And when it arrives, the only question that will matter is, were you spiritually prepared? I was given a second chance at life. Not to go back to business as usual, but to sound the alarm, to share what I witnessed, to help people understand that the unseen realm is more real than anything we touch. If something in your spirit resonated with what you heard today, that's not coincidence. That's the same divine hand that pulled me back from death, reaching out to you right now. The question isn't whether this message is true. The question is, What will you do with it? Time is shorter than you think. October 24th is approaching. And when it arrives, the only thing that will matter is whether you were spiritually awake or asleep. I didn't survive 8 minutes of death to keep this truth to myself. And you didn't watch this video by accident. Pass this message to someone who needs to hear it. Not because I'm asking for views or subscribers, but because souls are at stake and we're running out of time. Don't let this moment pass you by.